Today I will introduce the end game for Islam. We will read the story of Moses from Surah 28, Ayat 23 to 29, following the translation by Mustafa Katab in the clear Qur'an. When he arrived at the well of Midian, he found a group of people watering their herds. Apart from them, he noticed two women holding back their herd. He asked them, "What is the problem?" They replied, "We cannot water our animals until the other shepherds are done, for our father is a very old man." So he watered their herd for them, then withdrew to the shade and prayed, "My Lord, I am truly in desperate need of whatever provision you may have in store for me." Then one of the two women came to him, walking bashfully. She said, "My father is inviting you, so he might reward you for watering our animals for us." When Moses came to him and told him his whole story, the old man said, "Have no fear, you are now safe from the wrongdoing people." One of the two daughters suggested, "Oh my dear father, hire him. The best man for employment is definitely the strong and trustworthy one." The old man proposed, "I wish to marry one of these two daughters of mine to you, provided that you stay in my service for 8 years. If you complete 10, it will be a favor from you, but I do not wish to make it difficult for you. Allah willing, you will find me an agreeable man." Moses responded, "Then it is settled between you and I. Whichever term I fulfill, there will be no further obligation for me, and Allah is a witness to what we say." When Moses has completed the term and was traveling with his family, he spotted a fire on the side of Mount Tur. He said to his family, "Stay here, for I have spotted a fire. Perhaps from where I can bring you some directions or a torch from the fire so you might warm yourself." Here Muhammad was mixing up two stories from the Torah. We find them in Genesis 29 and Exodus 2. Let's read them carefully, paying attention to the details. The story of Moses' marriage. Exodus 2, 15 to 22. When Pharaoh heard of it, he sought to kill Moses, but Moses fled from Pharaoh and stayed in the land of Midian. And he sat down by a well. Now the priest of Midian has 7 daughters, and they came and drew the water and filled the troughs to water their father's flock. The shepherds came and drove them away, but Moses stood up and saved them and watered their flock. When they came home to their father Reuel, he said, "How is it that you have come home so early today?" They said, "An Egyptian delivered us out of the hand of the shepherds, and even drew water for us, and watered the flock." He said to his daughters, "Then where is he? Why have you left the man? Call him, that he might eat bread." And Moses was content to dwell with the man, and he gave Moses his daughter Zipporah. She gave birth to a son, and he called his name Gershom, for he said, "I have been a sojourner in a foreign land." Exodus 3 verse 1. Now Moses was keeping the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian, and he led his flock to the west side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. And now the story of Jacob's marriage, Genesis 29, 13 to 30. As soon as Laban heard the news about Jacob, his sister's son, he ran to meet him and embraced him and kissed him, and brought him to his house. Jacob told Laban all the things, and Laban said to him, "Surely you are my bone and my flesh." And he stayed with him a month. Then Laban said to Jacob, "Because you are my kinsman, should you therefore serve me for nothing? Tell me, what shall your wages be?" Now Laban has 2 daughters. The name of the oldest was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah's eyes were weak, but Rachel was beautiful in form and appearance. Jacob loved Rachel, and he said, "I will serve you 7 years for your younger daughter Rachel." Laban said, "It is better that I will give her to you than that I should give her to any other man. Stay with me." So Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed to him but a few days because of the love he had for her. Then Jacob said to Laban, "Give me my wife, that I may go in to her, for my time is completed." So Laban gathered together all the people of the place and made the feast. But in the evening he took his daughter Leah and brought her to Jacob, and he went into her. Laban gave his female servant Zilpah to his daughter Leah to be her servant. And in the morning, behold, it was Leah. And Jacob said to Laban, "What is this you have done to me? Did I not serve with you for Rachel? Why then have you deceived me?" Laban said, "It is not so done in our country to give the younger before the firstborn. Complete the week of this one, and we will give you the other also in return for serving me another 7 years." Jacob did so and completed her week. Then Laban gave him his daughter Rachel to be his wife. Laban gave his female servant Bilhah to his daughter Rachel to be her servant. So Jacob went into Rachel also, and he loved Rachel more than Leah, and served Laban for another 7 years. If you didn't realize it, this part of the story of Jacob occurred more than 200 years prior to the part of the story of Moses that we read. Since Muhammad was an illiterate Arab who was not able to read the Torah himself, he relied upon hearing stories of the biblical prophets by word of mouth. He learned the stories most likely from the Jews, who taught him orally, but which he could not verify for himself by reading the Torah, exactly as it mentioned in Surah 25 verses 4 to 5. The disbelievers say, "This Qur'an is nothing but a fabrication which he made up with the help of others. They claim is totally unjustified and untrue. And they say these revelations are only ancient fables which he has had written down, and they are rehearsed to him morning and evening." I think that those Jews deliberately told Muhammad the story the wrong way in order to prevent the conversion of Jews to Islam in the future. Now, I will deal with only counter-argument Muslims have, and the claim that they have no choice but to fall back upon, or else acknowledge for Islam is false. They are forced to claim that the Torah was corrupted by the Jews no later than 250 years before Jesus, and which means it would have been corrupted more than 860 years before Muhammad. If we follow that Islamic reasoning, there must have been an original version of the stories of Moses and Jacob in the Torah that matched the Qur'an version. In the Qur'an, there is no mention of Jacob's story, so the difference is in the Moses story. And that means the mention of Moses serving a term for his marriage, which is mentioned only in the Qur'an, has to have been in the original Torah before it was supposedly corrupted by the Jews. If the Islamic claim is true, how could the Jews have corrupted the Torah so that it told their stories in the way it does now? There seem to be two possible explanations. One, that Moses' contracted term for marriage was removed from his original story, but that Jacob's original story didn't look any different that it does in today's Torah. So on this view, Jacob's story in the Torah was always said that he had contracted terms for both of his marriages. That never changed. The only change was in Moses' story. The alternative explanation is that the original Torah told the story of Jacob without any terms for his marriages, while the story of Moses did have a term for his marriage, and that the Jews changed both accounts and switched them around, so that the term of marriage in Moses' story was transferred over to Jacob, leaving Moses without any contracted term for his marriage. So, on the first view, only Moses' story changed with the removal of a term for his marriage, and on the second view, both stories were changed with the switching around with who had a term for his marriage, moving the term from Moses to Jacob. Now let's evaluate these possible explanations. Let's look at the first explanation, that only Moses' term was removed. It's obvious that there is no reason for the Jews to have taken their Torah scrolls and removed Moses having a term of service for his marriage. What possible reason could there have been? It doesn't affect any doctrine like original sin or the Trinity, or anything that would be a motivation for someone to intentionally change the account. Nor is it about the moral issue that someone might think would taint the character of Moses, or that would exonerate him from bad behavior. It doesn't make him look any better or worse, and it is definitely not an unintentional mistake that could be accounted for by a scribe. It is too complex of a change for it to be an accident. Given that there can be no motivation to change Moses' story, and because it is too complex of a change for it to be a copying mistake, we can discard that explanation. Let's look at the second explanation, that the story about the marriage arrangements for Jacob and Moses were switched around by the Jews. It is widely accepted by all Muslims, Christians and Jews as fact that there were 12 tribes of Israel. They numbered 12 simply because of the 12 sons of Jacob. Jacob was also named Israel. As Genesis tells us, those 12 sons were born from 4 different women. 2 of them, named Leah and Rachel, were sisters. These were the 2 wives that Jacob married. Each of the sisters had 1 maid servant. Their names were Bilhah and Zilpah. Jacob had children from each of these 4 women, to the wives, to the concubines. Because the 2 wives of Jacob's sisters, they end up in competition with each other to give birth to more kids than the other sister. As a result of this, when Leah or Rachel were unable to have children for a time, they gave Jacob their male servants as surrogates to continue the competition. They followed the same example that already happened with Sarah giving her maidservant Hagar to Abraham, when Sarah was unable to have children herself. And the sole reason for Jacob to have two wives instead of only one wife in the first place was because their father Laban tricked Jacob. Laban promised to have the youngest daughter Rachel married to Jacob after he served Laban for the 7 years he agreed to. But instead Laban gave Jacob the oldest daughter Leah on the wedding night. Now Jacob was furious, but he was now trapped being married to Leah. And on the next day Laban manipulated Jacob by proposing another term of work for an additional 7 years, in which case Jacob would only need to complete his honeymoon period with Leah, and then he would marry Rachel right after that. Then he would be stuck working for Laban for another 7 years, and Jacob agreed. That's how the nation of Israel had 12 sons of Jacob, who were the heads of the 12 tribes and the fathers of the nation. If we follow the second Muslim hypothetical explanation, in which the marriage stories for Moses and Jacob were switched with one another, that would require a massive number of changes. Why? Because the account of Jacob's wives and the 12 sons he had from them is the foundational story for the nation of Israel. This would require an unimaginable number of changes across the entire Bible, both Old and New Testament, and in almost every single book. For example, who would track down and fix all these verses that talk about Jacob in the books which are not part of the Torah? For example, in the book of Ruth, written over 300 years after Moses, we read verses 11 to 12. Then all the people who were at the gate and the elders said, "We are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your house like Rachel and Leah, whom together built up the house of Israel." Here the Jews mentioned Rachel and Leah being the foundation of the nation of Israel, referring to the story of Jacob's marriage that we read in Genesis 29. In another book of the Old Testament, in the book of the prophet Hosea, which was written over 700 years after Moses, we read this, Hosea 12:12. Jacob fled to the land of Aram. There Israel served for a wife, and for a wife he guarded sheep. And this is a verse clearly reminding that it was Jacob who served for his beloved wife Rachel in Mesopotamia, and not Moses who served for his wife in the land of Midian, as in the Qur'an. Those clear indications, supported by many other references, are factual proofs that the story of Jacob's marriage that involved the terms of service was never corrupted by the Jews in the Torah. It was even referenced elsewhere in the Old Testament. But Muhammad had the bad habit of confusing different stories and characters of the Bible. It is clearly shown in the story of Saul, Surah 247-51, where Muhammad unknowingly placed two stories that had nothing to do with Saul or David into the Quranic story. The story of return of the Ark of the Covenant from Philistines in 1 Samuel 5 and 6, in which the Ark returned decades before Saul was picked up to be king, and Muhammad mistakenly confused Saul with Gideon in the story of Gideon, choosing his soldiers for an army by drinking from the river in Judges 7. Therefore, we could confidently say that Muhammad confused the story of Jacob's marriage with the story of Moses' the mother of Jesus with Miriam, the sister of Aaron and Moses. And he also moved the construction of the Tower of Babel from Mesopotamia to Egypt at the time of Pharaoh, and appointed Haman himself, who lived 1,000 years after Pharaoh and Moses, as her main contractor. After refuting both possibilities for the Quran to be correct and the Torah being wrong, we are coming to the inevitable conclusion. Muhammad, as the true author of the Quran, whether himself or through a scribe, was mixed up the two stories because the choice of woman offered to Moses is the same choice offered to Jacob, namely between two sisters. Two other parts of the Quran's account prove that Muhammad mixed up Jacob and Moses' real stories in the Torah. Firstly, Moses in Exodus arrived first at the well and sat down alone. Then the 7 daughters of Jethro came to water their flock, but as they were drawing the water and filling the troughs, the male shepherds came and pushed them away, and took the water the women drew for their own flocks. Moses then stepped in and stopped the man from harassing the woman, and finished watering the flock for the woman. But in Genesis, when Jacob arrived at the well, he was not the first one like Moses. Other male shepherds were already there. It was their custom to wait for all the shepherds to arrive, so that they could water the flocks together, because the well had a heavy cover over it that needed to be moved on and off. Then Jacob saw Rachel coming with her flock, and he decided he could remove the heavy lid himself and water her flock. There was no conflict with the male shepherds. The Quran's account of the well matches exactly with Rachel and Jacob in Genesis 29. In both accounts, Jacob in Genesis and Moses in the Quran do not arrive at the well first. Male shepherds are already at the well. Neither account has Jacob/Moses fighting off the shepherds to rescue women, but the Moses in Exodus arrived at the well first and then fights off the shepherds. So we can see that the Quran's Moses is the biblical Jacob. Secondly, in Genesis 31, when Jacob finished his second term of 7 years of service for Rachel, he packed his bags with all of his family and traveled back from Haran to the land of Canaan. In Exodus, after Moses married his one and only wife Zipporah, Moses did not travel anywhere. He stayed in the land of Midian for 40 years. Only after all that time, while Moses was out of his own keeping the flock of his father-in-law's sheep, did he see the burning bush at Mount Sinai in the land of Midian. And it was there that God told him to return to Egypt to lead the Israelites out from that country. Prior to that, Moses was not intending to go anywhere. But in the Quran, Moses married one of two sisters after a term of service, and when that term of service was completed, he packed his bags with his family and traveled back to Egypt. And on his way back with his family, he encountered the burning bush. Obviously, Muhammad mistakenly thought of Moses traveling back to Egypt with his family when it was really the biblical account of Jacob returning with his family from Haran to Canaan. That is more. Moses didn't even travel with his family, but according to Exodus 18, Moses left his wife and 2 his sons back with Jethro in Midian when he traveled back to Egypt with Aaron to liberate the Israelites from slavery. That makes the story of the Quran to be a fabrication at fault and reveals that its true author was not the all-knowing God, but an illiterate Bedouin Muhammad Ibn Abdullah. And by proving that makes Islam a man-made religion. Thank you.